A Samantha Mystery, The Curse of Ravenscourt, Chapter 10, A Midnight Visit. Too scared to move, Samantha stared at the pale hand. It reached forward, hovering over the dresser that stood next to the door. A small white object fluttered from the hand. Samantha heard a gentle rustle as it landed on the dresser top, and she guessed it was a piece of paper. Then the door slowly closed again. For several long moments, Samantha lay very still in bed, hoping desperately that the door would remain closed. It did, and finally she breathed easily again. What could possibly be on the paper, she wondered. Finally, her curiosity outweighed her fear. She got out of bed and switched on the light by the door. By the bright electric lamp, the small square of folded white paper looked fairly ordinary. She unfolded it and read the scrawled message. "Goodbye. I have chicken pox and I'm going home. You should leave too. It is not safe here. Mary." For the reason Mary had caught chicken pox, Samantha thought as she set the note down on her bedside table. "We have to help her." In a moment, Samantha had made up her mind. She slid into her bathrobe and slippers. Then, leaving the bedroom door open, she crossed the hall to the narrow passage that led to the servants' room. A light was on in this passage in case the servants had to answer a bell in the middle of the night. Samantha remembered that the first bedroom belonged to Mary. Feeling out of place, she knocked gently on Mary's door. It swung open. The bed was neatly made, but the dresser was bare. Mary was gone. Returning to the main hall, Samantha checked the door to the service entrance back at the apartment. Gertrude always locked the doors before bedtime, but this door was now unlocked. Samantha felt sure that Mary must have left that way. If I can just catch up with her, maybe I can convince her to stay. Samantha quietly opened the door and slipped out into the service entrance. It was a small space with the whitewashed walls and a painted wood floor by the light of a bulb hanging from the ceiling. Samantha saw that there had been two service elevators here, but both shafts were now boarded up. The signs across them read "Closed." Across from the elevators, a wooden staircase led to the lower floors. As Samantha started down the stairs, she felt the cold, rough wood through her thin slippers. For a moment she considered going back to the apartment for her shoes, but then she decided that it would take too much time. "I'll be back in bed soon," she told herself. Each landing was lit by a single weak bulb that cast shadows on the stairs. When Samantha had gone down several flights, she heard a door close far below. She wanted to call out for Mary, but she was afraid of waking other people in the building. She continued down the stairs as quickly as she could. Then, when she finally arrived on the ground floor, she saw that she was standing in an entry with two doors. The heavier door seemed to exit to the alley behind the apartment building. It was bolted from the inside. Mary couldn't have gone out that way, Samantha reasoned. Cautiously, Samantha opened the other door and found herself standing at the top of the cellar stairs. She hesitated. It was dark down there, and the air still smelled of overheated metal. The furnace boilers were chugging loudly. Samantha's palms started to sweat. "Mary?" she called out quietly. There was no response. Mary must be nearby, Samantha told herself. She gathered her courage and started down, gripping the banister tightly. There was no light at the top of these stairs, and the cellar was so dark that Samantha couldn't see when she had reached the final step. But suddenly the banister ended. She carefully edged her toes forward and found that she was standing on the stone cellar floor. A bulb was burning somewhere in the cellar, but by its dim light, Samantha could see the crushed remains of the service elevator and the crater it had left in the cellar floor. Samantha recalled the horror of the crash. She remembered Mary's scrawled warning, "It is not safe here." "Mary?" Samantha called out softly once more. The clunking furnace boilers and the banging pipes drowned out her voice. Samantha was scared and tired, and her feet were cold. "I'd better leave," she decided. She was trying to go back upstairs when she heard a man's voice rise above the clattering machines. "You can't leave! Not now!" Samantha's first thought was that the man was talking to her. She froze and listened intently. His voice seemed to come from somewhere in the center of the cellar, half way between the stairs that led to the lobby and back the service entrance. "I can and I will," Samantha heard Mary say. Her voice was loud and she sounded angry. "I will not be helping you no more." The man rumbled an answer. Samantha couldn't distinguish all his words, but she heard him say, "Always some slight risk involved, but—" Samantha thought the man's voice sounded familiar. Could it be Mr. Winthrop, she wondered. Then she realized that the speaker did not have a British accent. Is it Martin? She wished she could steal a glance at the man, but she was too afraid of being seen herself. She stepped into the deep shadows near the elevator shaft. You're going too far with this curse stuff, Mary told the man. The broken boilers, the 13, the rats you brought in, those things didn't hurt nobody. But them two little girls upstairs could have been killed in that elevator. I never forgiven myself, and your money let me do no good if I end up in a bad place for my sins. Listening in darkness, Samantha realized that this man in the cellar must have deliberately crashed the elevator. What else is he planning to do, she wondered. Her mouth felt dry. I'm not gonna let ya, the man began, but then more machines clanged. Samantha couldn't hear the rest of his reply. When the machines quieted, Samantha heard Mary protesting. And I'll not be telling nobody. Raven treated us like dirt when we lived in that hole he calls a building. But I don't want no more of this curse. Someone's gonna get hurt. A moment later, Mary swished by, her long skirt coming within inches of Samantha's hiding place. Samantha held her breath, hoping that Mary wouldn't notice her standing in the shadows. She heard Mary's shoes clip on the wooden steps that led to the surface entrance. Then the door at the top of the stairs closed with a bang. Now Samantha knew that she was alone in the cellar with the mysterious man. Where is he? What is he doing? Samantha tried to listen for sounds of his movements, but the machines began their loud clunking again. Suddenly, the dim light in the center of the cellar vanished. Samantha blinked her eyes and then blinked again. By leaning out slightly from her hiding place, she could see a tiny light. It seemed to be moving about. He must have a pocket torch. What if he comes over here and shines it at me? She pulled her head back in and crouched down in the shadows. Then she gasped. Just a few feet away, a pair of glowing eyes were staring at her. She froze, too scared to even scream. The cellar went quiet, and Samantha heard a soft meow as the eyes turned away from her. The manager's cat, she realized with a rush of relief. For several long moments, Samantha waited in the shadows, hoping for a chance to escape. Then the machines rested again. In the quiet, she heard a clank of metal and then footsteps. She held herself rigid, but the man didn't pass near her hiding place. Instead, he seemed to be walking away in the opposite direction, toward the stairs that led to the lobby. The glimmer of the pocket torch disappeared, and the cellar was blacker than a deep cave. I have to get out of here, Samantha thought desperately. She started to inch her way to the back staircase. It was only a few feet away, but she had to be careful to avoid the elevator shaft. She was reaching out her hands to see if she could feel the banister when she heard heavy footsteps coming down the front staircase. Very slowly, Samantha turned her head. Again, she saw a glimmer of light from what she guessed was a pocket torch. She heard another clank of metal and a man's voice declaring, "What the?" She tried to listen hard to see what was happening, but the furnace boiler began to rumble again. "Martin!" Another voice called out loudly above the noise of the boilers. "What are you doing down there?" "Martin," thought Samantha. "It must be him." "Checking the electrical wires, Mr. Winthrop," Martin called out. "The lights went out in the lobby a few minutes ago." "Don't touch anything," Mr. Winthrop ordered. "I'll call an electrician in the morning." "I think I can fix it, sir," Martin shouted. A few minutes later, the single light bulb was burning once again, but by its feeble light, Samantha saw the staircase just a foot away. She grasped the skirt of her long robe so it wouldn't rustle. Then she began to tiptoe up the stairs. At any moment, she expected a hand to grab her or a voice to call out, "Stop!" But the stairs were hidden in the darkness, and the clanking boilers covered the sound of her steps. When she reached the top of the cellar stairs, she escaped the door. Then she raced up the service stairs as if a pack of angry dogs were chasing her. She ran until her legs were quivering and the stabbing pain in her side was so sharp that she couldn't take another step. She stopped and listened for the sound of someone coming after her. Except for the sound of her own gasping, everything was quiet. As soon as she caught her breath, she kept climbing, taking 2 steps at a time. Finally, she arrived on the top floor. Panting, she let herself back into the apartment through the service door, locking it behind her. She stopped and breathed deeply. Then she hurried down the silent hall toward her room, where a light still shone through the open doorway. She closed the door behind her and dove under the covers of her bed. She was huddled in bed when she heard footsteps in the hall. For one awful second, she thought, "He's come after me." Then Ellie walked into the room. I heard you walking around and then I saw the light in here, Nellie said with a yawn. I guess I fell asleep in Bridget and Jenny's room and she stopped and looked at Samantha more closely. Something's on your face. Samantha pulled herself up in bed. There was a hand mirror on her bedside table, and she picked it up and looked at her reflection. Her nose and cheeks were smudged with dust. I was hiding in the cellar, she began. As she wiped off the dust, she saw that her hand was shaking. She drew her blankets tightly around herself. Trying to stop the shaking, she fell inside. Why were you in the cellar? Nellie asked, sitting down on the edge of Samantha's bed. Are you all right? Samantha handed her the note that Mary had left them. It started with this, she said. Then she began to tell Nellie everything that happened. Nellie interrupted her halfway through. You mean it really wasn't the curse that caused the elevator accident? Or the other things? Mary said that the man had done them. He even brought the rats into the building. Samantha told her. He wanted everyone to believe in the curse. What a rotten thing to do, exclaimed Nellie, her cheeks going red with anger. He scared all of us. Did you see who it was? No, said Samantha. She explained that she had heard Mr. Winthrop calling to Martin, but she couldn't be sure whether Martin was the same man who'd been in the cellar earlier. When Samantha finished her story, Nellie shook her head sadly. Oh, Samantha, that must have been awful. The worst part was when it was all dark, Samantha admitted. I thought I'd never get out. Maybe we should talk to Mr. Winthrop and tell him everything you heard, Nellie suggested. But all I know for sure is that Mary was talking to a man. And if we tell Mr. Winthrop everything, we'll get Mary in trouble. Maybe with the police. I wouldn't want that to happen, Nellie said thoughtfully. Mary seemed so kind. It's hard to believe she tricked us. She didn't want to hurt anyone, Samantha pointed out, and she left us a note to warn us. It would have been better if she told us the name of the person who was doing all these things. She promised the man she wouldn't tell anyone. Maybe they're friends. Mary and Martin are friendly, Nellie recalled. Remember how we saw them talking together in the lobby? And Martin was in the lobby tonight, too. Samantha nodded. I know, she said. That's not enough proof, though. For several minutes, the girls sat silently. I wish Aunt Cornelia were here, Samantha said at last. She'd know what to do. But she's not coming back, and we don't know when she's coming back. And we have to talk to someone, Nellie argued. We can't wait for more accidents. What if Bridget and Jenny had been on the elevator today? Samantha shivered. The possibility was too awful to think about. If Aunt Cornelia isn't home by the time we get back from school tomorrow, we could talk with Eloise, she suggested. Nellie considered the idea. All right, she said at last, and I'll tell Bridget and Jenny not to set foot out of the apartment tomorrow while we're at school. Both girls finally got into bed. As Samantha drifted off to sleep, her thoughts returned to the man who had been in the cellar. What's he gonna do next? She worried.